I stared at the message from my mother for 5 minutes, unable to decide how to respond. Her texts were usually dry and to the point. Delancey, don't forget your appointment with the tax advisor. Delancey, your aunt asked why you haven't called. But this message was out of the ordinary. Dear, we are having a special family party at the Laurel Wreath next Friday. Your presence is required. There will be an important announcement. The Laurel Wreath was the most expensive restaurant in San Mateo. It was where his mother took Fletcher to celebrate every achievement, from his first math competition in school to his first promotion. I had never been invited. Why did she need me there now? Was Fletcher getting another promotion? Or was Tegan finally pregnant, and my mother was going to be a grandmother? Either way, it was none of my business. I was an extra in their play, the Hutch family life. I was tempted to say I was busy, but I knew how that would end. 3 missed calls, then a call from my father, then a conversation with my cousin Tallulah about how Delancey was letting everyone down again. It was easier to go and sit through the 4 hours. I'll be there, thanks for inviting me, I replied and put the phone down. My desk had a view of the bay. Meridian Stroy's office was on the 8th floor of a business center, not a penthouse, of course, but high enough to see the sun playing on the water. The view always calmed me when my nerves were on edge. I opened my email. Among the dozen new messages, one stood out from our CFO, Winston Pryor. Confirmed. The share buyout will be completed on Friday 1700. Friday. Family Party Day. At 1700 hours, I would be the majority shareholder of Meridian Stroy. And at 7 p.m., I would be sitting at the table with the family that still considered me a failure. The irony of fate did not escape me. Delaney, are you okay? Meredith, our office manager, was standing in the doorway of my office. You look like you've seen a ghost. Everything's fine. I quickly closed my email. Just family stuff. Oh, I understand. She nodded sympathetically, although I doubt she really did. Meredith had a normal family. At least she never complained about her relatives, unlike most of my friends. When she left, I leaned back in my chair and let the memories flood back. I was 8 when I first realized that I was on the periphery of my parents' attention. We were sitting at dinner, and I was excitedly telling them that I had gotten the highest grade on my science project. My mother listened with a polite smile, my father nodded occasionally, and both of them looked past me. Then Fletcher, who was 11 at the time, announced that he had been accepted onto the school swim team. The reaction was immediate and deafening. My mother beamed with a genuine smile, and my father clapped his hands. "Our future Olympic champion," he announced, and my story was forgotten as if I had never started it. At 13, I tried a different tactic. I started hiding my successes. When I won a school essay contest, I simply didn't mention it at home. When I received a certificate for volunteer work, I hid it in my desk drawer, and oddly enough, it worked. The tension at home eased. While Fletcher shone, I could exist in relative peace. I became invisible, and it wasn't so bad. After school, I wanted to study business administration, but my mother insisted that I go to a local college. 4 years at a prestigious university is a waste of money for a girl, she said at the time. You're going to get married anyway. I wonder what she'll say when she finds out that I bought a controlling stake in a company with an annual turnover of several $1,000,000. I started working at Meridian Construction right after college. I was lucky. They were looking for an assistant project manager, and I was a perfect fit. I enjoyed the work, even the most routine aspects of it. I loved order, systems, and the feeling that every detail was in its place. I quickly moved up the career ladder and became a project manager after 3 years. That's when I learned from Winston that the company was in a difficult position. The owner wanted to retire, his sons weren't interested in the construction business, and the shares were gradually being put up for sale. I started buying them, little by little at first, using my savings and modest bonuses. Then I took out a loan. I lived frugally, denying myself everything but the bare necessities. And now, after 4 years of planning and 6 months of intense negotiations, I was ready to become the majority shareholder. And no one in my family had any idea. My phone vibrated. It was Tallulah. "Did you hear about the party? Aunt Vinny said Fletcher has some big news. Are you going?" Tallulah was the only person in the family who called my mother Aunt Vinnie instead of Aunt Winifred, and the only one who shortened Fletcher's name to Fletch. These small acts of defiance made me love her even more. "Yes, I will," I replied. "Great, me too. Maybe we can meet up beforehand? Remember that cafe near my work?" Tallulah worked at the San Mateo Library. She had been a bookworm since childhood, and although her mother, Aunt Una, had hoped her daughter would choose a more prestigious profession, Tallulah had insisted on her own path. It was another reason why we understood each other so well. "At 4:30?" I suggested. "Perfect. See you later, cousin." I smiled and went back to work. I had a dozen things to finish before Friday, and I couldn't afford to get distracted. The rest of the week flew by in the usual work hustle and bustle. On Friday morning, I woke up with the feeling that it was a special day. A new dress was waiting for me in my closet, dark blue, simple but elegant. I had bought it especially for this day, although I wouldn't admit it to anyone. The office was bustling with the usual Friday excitement. Everyone was discussing their plans for the weekend, but I was lost in my own thoughts. At 4:30 p.m., I made the final edits to the document I had been working on and sent it to the client. Then I gathered my things and headed for the elevator. "Have a nice weekend, Delancey," Meredith said goodbye. "Thanks, you too," I replied, not mentioning that my weekend was unlikely to be peaceful. Marjorie's Cafe was 2 blocks from the library. It was a small, cozy place with worn leather couches and bookshelves lining the walls. The perfect place for Tallulah. She was already waiting for me, occupying our favorite table in the corner. When I walked in, she waved at me with a big smile that always made her look like a sunny day. "You look amazing," she said, hugging me. "New dress?" "Yes," I said, blushing slightly. I decided to splurge. "You did the right thing. Coffee?" we ordered, and Tallulah got straight to the point. "So, what do you think is going to happen today?" "No idea," I shrugged. "Maybe Fletcher's getting a promotion?" "Possibly. Or maybe he and Tegan have finally decided to bless Vinnie with grandchildren." I smiled. My mother's obsession with future grandchildren was a family legend. Every time Tegan picked up a glass of water instead of wine, my mother would give her a warning look. "How are things with you?" Tallulah asked. "You've been kind of mysterious lately." Same old," I lied. "Work, home, TV shows in the evenings. And no mysterious admirer?" She winked playfully. "No," I shook my head. "I don't have time for that." "Oh, come on," she waved her hand. "Everyone says that, and then boom, they fall head over heels in love." "Not me," I said firmly. Tallulah sighed. "Okay, I won't push you. But you know Vinnie will ask." "I know, and I'll say the same thing I always do. I'm focused on my career." "And she'll say that at your age, it's time to think about a family." Tallulah rolled her eyes. We both laughed, even though neither of us found it very funny. My mother really did think that at 24, I was hopelessly behind in getting married and having children. The fact that I had never expressed any desire to go down that path didn't bother her. "How are your parents?" I asked, changing the subject. "Dad's still recovering from his surgery, but he's doing better. Mom wants him to quit his job and move to that retirement community in Florida." "And him?" "He says he'd rather die than play golf with those old people." "You know Uncle Garth?" I nodded. Uncle Garth was stubborn, like all the men in our family, including my father Godfrey, who still worked 60 hours a week despite 2 heart attacks. We finished our coffee, and I glanced at my watch. 4:55. In 5 minutes, I would officially be the owner of a controlling stake in the company. "We should get going," Tallulah said, noticing my gaze. "I don't want to be late and give Vinnie a reason to be upset." We paid and went outside. It was a clear day with a light breeze from the bay, perfect weather for a walk. But we took a taxi. Laurel Wreath was on the other side of town. In the car, I checked my email. A new message from Winston. "Congratulations, Miss Hatch. The deal is done. The documents will be ready for signing on Monday." I felt my heart beat faster. It had happened. It had really happened. I glanced at Tallulah, but she was looking out the window, lost in her thoughts. I wanted to tell her everything right then and there, but I held back. I had waited too long for this moment to ruin it by revealing it prematurely. "Are you okay?" Tallulah asked, noticing my silence. "Yes, just a little nervous," I replied, and it was the honest truth. "Me too," she squeezed my hand. "But we'll get through this, just like we always do." The taxi stopped at the Laurel Wreath, an elegant Art Deco building with an emerald green sign. A uniformed doorman stood at the entrance and opened the door for us with a slight bow. Inside, the restaurant was exactly as I had imagined. High ceilings, soft lighting, white tablecloths, and silver cutlery, the smell of fresh flowers and expensive perfume, soft jazz music. A world I had never belonged to. At least, that's what my family believed. "Good evening," the maitre d' greeted us. "How can I help you?" "We're here for the hatch party," Tallulah said. "Of course, please follow me." He led us through the hall to a private room at the back of the restaurant. Judging by the luxurious decor and size, this room must have cost a fortune. I wondered how much exactly. I made a mental note to check the bill after the party. Everyone was already there. My mother was wearing her favorite pale blue dress, which she thought made her look younger. My father was wearing a dark gray suit with his usual burgundy striped tie, his lucky one, as he called it. Fletcher was tall and fit, with his usual confident smile. Next to him was Tegan, elegant as always in an ivory dress that accentuated her tan. Also present were Aunt Una and Uncle Garth, Tallulah's parents, and my grandmother, Taffy's widow, who at 83 still looked better than all of us. "Delancey, Tallulah," my mother greeted us with a forced smile. Finally, we were starting to worry. "Sorry, Mom," I said, leaning in to kiss her on the cheek. "Traffic." "Of course, dear," she replied in a tone that made it clear she didn't believe me. "Sit down, we were just about to order appetizers." I took a seat between Tallulah and my grandmother, as far away from Fletcher as possible. That was my usual strategy at family gatherings, stay out of the spotlight. "How are you, Delancey?" my grandmother asked, squeezing my hand with her wrinkled fingers. "You look well." "Thank you, Grandma," I smiled. "Everything's great." "I'm glad to hear it." She winked at me. "Is it just me, or has something changed?" Grandma had always been observant. I wondered what she had noticed. A new confidence in my posture? The sparkle in the eyes of someone who had just achieved their goal? "Maybe," I replied evasively. The waiter brought the menu, and the conversation was temporarily interrupted. I already knew what I was going to order. Scallops with risotto, a dish Fletcher always talked about with such enthusiasm. Today, I could afford it. My mother tapped her spoon against her glass to get our attention. "Before we order, I'd like to propose a toast," she announced. "To Fletcher, who has made us proud once again." Everyone raised their glasses. I did too, even though I was growing irritated. Fletcher again. Always Fletcher. "As you know," my mother continued, "Fletcher has been with Global Investments for 5 years, and today we are gathered here to celebrate his promotion to senior managing partner." Applause. Shouts of admiration. Fletcher beamed like a copper basin, and Tegan looked at him adoringly. "This is a tremendous achievement," my father added. "To become a managing partner at 30 is almost a record at their firm." More applause. I forced myself to smile and nod, even though I knew it was all a lie, at least partly. Fletcher did work for Global Investments, but the last project he had been in charge of had failed miserably. I knew this because our company had been involved as a subcontractor. It was behind schedule, over budget, and the clients were unhappy. Rumors of his dismissal had been circulating for weeks, but of course, Fletcher would never admit that to his family, and they would never question his success. When the initial excitement died down, my mother turned to me. "How are things with you, Delancey? Still working at that construction company?" I nodded. "Yes, Mom, at Meridian Construction. And still, what's it called? Assistant manager?" "Project manager," I corrected, feeling my cheeks flush. Not from embarrassment, as she would have thought, but from anger. She knew my job title perfectly well. "Oh yes, of course," she waved her hand. "And how do you like it?" "Very much," I replied briefly. "How nice," she smiled condescendingly. "Well, not everyone has a commercial streak like Fletcher." I said nothing, taking a sip of wine. Maybe I didn't have a commercial streak, but I had a plan and it was working. The order was placed, and the conversation moved on to other topics. The weather, politics, the latest movie everyone had seen except me. I responded when addressed, but mostly just observed. At Fletcher, who was drinking too much and laughing too loudly. At Tegan, who was nervously fiddling with her earring when she thought no one was looking. At my mother, who was controlling the conversation with her usual iron grip. When the main courses arrived, I felt the tension begin to ease. Maybe the evening would pass without incident. Maybe I would be able to eat, say goodbye politely, and go home with my secret triumph. But, of course, with the Hatcher family, nothing is ever that simple. The Laurel Wreath restaurant lived up to its reputation. High ceilings with moldings, soft light from crystal chandeliers, snow-white tablecloths and silver cutlery, everything screamed luxury. The maitre d' led Tallulah and me to a private room, and I involuntarily held my breath as I crossed the threshold. Everyone was already there. My mother was wearing a pale blue dress, which she said brought out her eyes. My father was in his favorite dark gray suit with a burgundy tie. Fletcher was sprawled smugly in the chair at the head of the table, and Tegan was next to him, beaming like a Christmas tree. Also present were Aunt Una and Uncle Garth, Tallulah's parents, and my grandmother Taffy, who, despite being 83, looked more elegant than any of us. "Delancey Tallulah," my mother greeted us with a forced smile. Finally, we were starting to worry. "Sorry, Mom, traffic," I replied, leaning down to kiss her on the cheek. "Of course, dear," she replied in a tone that made it clear she didn't believe me. "Sit down, we were just about to order appetizers." I took a seat between Tallulah and my grandmother, trying to stay away from Fletcher. That was my usual strategy at family gatherings, stay as far away from the center of attention as possible. "How are you, Delancey?" Grandma asked, squeezing my hand with her dry fingers. "You look well." "Thanks, Grandma." I smiled. "I'm great." "I'm glad to hear it." She winked at me. "Is it just me, or has something changed?" The waiter brought the menu, and the conversation was temporarily interrupted. I already knew what I was going to order. Scallops with risotto, a dish Fletcher always raved about. Today I could afford it. When the order was placed, my mother tapped her spoon on her glass to get our attention. "Before the appetizers arrive, I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, "to our Fletcher, who has made us proud once again." Everyone raised their glasses. I did too, even though I was growing irritated. Fletcher again. Always Fletcher. "As you all know," my mother continued, "Fletcher has been with Global Investments for 5 years, and today we are gathered here to celebrate his promotion to senior managing partner." Applause. Shouts of admiration. Fletcher beamed like a polished penny, and Tegan looked at him adoringly. "This is a tremendous achievement," added his father. "Becoming a managing partner at 30 is almost a record at their firm." "Thank you, Dad." Fletcher bowed his head slightly, as if accepting a well-deserved tribute. "I've worked hard for this." I almost choked on my wine. Fletcher and worked hard in the same sentence sounded like an oxymoron, especially considering what I knew about the real state of his project. When the initial excitement subsided, my mother turned to me. "How are things with you, Delancey? Still working at that construction company?" "Yes, Mom, at Meridian Construction." "And you're still, what's it called? Assistant manager?" "Project manager," I corrected, feeling my cheeks flush. Not out of embarrassment, as she would have thought, but out of anger. She knew my position very well. "Oh, yes, of course, manager." She waved her hand. "And how do you like it?" "Very much," I replied briefly. "How nice." She smiled condescendingly. "Well, not everyone has a commercial streak like Fletcher." The appetizers were brought in, and the conversation was interrupted for a short time. I focused on my food with relief, avoiding my relatives' glances. But the respite was short-lived. "Delancey, dear," my mother said to me again when the appetizers were finished, "are you still single? No prospects on the horizon?" "No, Mom," I replied, trying to remain calm. "I'm focused on my career." "Of course, dear," she said sympathetically, shaking her head. "But remember, a career won't keep you warm at night, and time is passing. At your age, I was already married and waiting for Fletcher." "Times have changed," I remarked. "Some things never change," she replied. "Family is still the most important thing. Right, Fletcher?" Absolutely, he nodded. Without my family's support, I wouldn't have half of what I have today. See? My mother looked at me triumphantly. Your brother understands the value of family. And look how far he's gotten. I said nothing, sipping my wine. A lump was in my throat, and it was hard to speak. Speaking of careers, Tegan interjected, turning to me with a fake smile. What exactly do you do at that construction company? I manage projects, I replied. I keep track of the budget, the work schedule, and solve any problems that arise in the process. How interesting, she said without the slightest interest in her voice. And is it well paid? It's enough, I replied curtly. Of course, not as good as Fletcher's job, my mother interjected. But Delancey has always been modest in her ambitions. It's not a question of ambition, Mom, I objected. It's a question of choice. Of course, dear, she patted my hand. Everyone chooses according to their abilities. I felt myself blushing with humiliation. Tallulah squeezed my hand under the table in silent support. The main courses were served, and for a while the conversation turned to other topics. Politics, the latest news, mutual acquaintances. I silently ate my scallops, which were truly excellent, although I could hardly appreciate their taste. Do you remember, Delancey, how you dreamed of becoming a journalist? My mother asked suddenly. Such naive dreams. It's good that you chose something more realistic. I never dreamed of becoming a journalist, I objected. It was your idea. It doesn't matter, she dismissed. The main thing is that you found your place, modest but stable. How is Delancey doing with her photography? Are you still doing that, dear? Aunt Una asked suddenly. A little, I replied. Photography was my hobby, the only creative outlet I allowed myself. She takes wonderful pictures, Tallulah interjected. She has real talent. How sweet, said my mother with the same indulgent smile. Hobbies are so important for a fulfilling life. Especially when you don't have a family, added Fletcher with a smirk. You have to fill your free time with something. Fletcher, my father said warningly, but without much enthusiasm. What? He raised his hands in a defensive gesture. I'm just saying I'm happy for Delancey. Not everyone has a life as full as Tegan and I do. Speaking of full lives, Tegan interjected, Fletcher and I are flying to the Maldives next week. A private villa over the water, a personal butler. How wonderful, my mother exclaimed. You deserve a vacation after all of Fletcher's successes. Yes, it will be the perfect way to celebrate his promotion. Tegan beamed like a Christmas tree. Have you been anywhere lately, Delancey? Aunt Una asked, perhaps out of politeness. Just business trips, I replied. We have projects in several states. How exciting, Fletcher said with a slight sneer. Business trips to provincial towns, 3-star hotels and lunches in diners. Not everyone can afford the Maldives, I retorted. That's exactly what I'm saying. He smiled smugly. The difference between our careers is obvious, isn't it? The waiter brought the champagne, and my mother tapped her glass again. I'd like to propose another toast, she announced. To Fletcher's bright future, to all the heights he will yet achieve. To Fletcher, everyone repeated, even me. Thank you, Fletcher smiled radiantly. But I couldn't have achieved anything without your support and belief in me. We've always believed in you, son, my father said emotionally. It was clear from childhood that you would go far. Unlike some, my mother added under her breath, glancing at me. I pretended not to hear, but my heart began to race. Were they really going to continue in this vein all evening? I remember how Fletcher showed leadership qualities even as a child, my mother began. Always first, always ahead. Then college, a master's degree at Wharton. Which you never got, I blurted out. I immediately regretted my words, but it was too late. There was a silence. Everyone looked at me, then at Fletcher. His smile became strained. It was a conscious decision, he snapped. I got a job offer I couldn't turn down. Of course, I nodded. I'm sorry. Delancey has always been attentive to detail, my mother said with a cold smile. Sometimes too much. But it's a good quality for her job, right? Tallulah interjected, trying to lighten the mood. Project managers need precision. Undoubtedly, my mother agreed. For performers, precision is a key skill, and for leaders like Fletcher, strategic thinking and charisma are important. Dessert arrived. an exquisite chocolate mousse with raspberry sauce. I cautiously tried it. Delicious. For the first time that evening, I was truly enjoying myself. Delancey always had a sweet tooth, my mother said with a subtle smile. That's where her figure problems started in her teenage years. Remember, dear? Here we go. Of course, she couldn't help mentioning my brief period of being overweight at 14, a period that coincided with my first period, a hormonal explosion and brutal bullying at school. Barely, I lied. In fact, I remembered every humiliating comment. You were such a cute, chubby girl, she continued with feigned tenderness. But then, thank God, everything worked out. Although, you should still watch what you eat. At our age, your metabolism isn't what it used to be. At our age? I asked. I'm 24, Mom. Exactly. She threw her hands up dramatically. 24 already. Time flies so fast. Soon it'll be 30, and then 40, and then it'll be too late to change anything. I clenched my teeth and pushed my dessert away. My appetite was gone. How sad, sighed Tegan. I can always eat whatever I want and not gain weight. You have excellent genes, dear, my mother praised her. And wonderful taste. Winifred, my grandmother said quietly, I don't think this is an appropriate topic for a holiday dinner. You're right, Mom, my mother agreed without a hint of remorse. Let's get back to Fletcher's accomplishments. Tell us more about your new project, dear. I'd be delighted. Fletcher straightened up, clearly enjoying the attention. It's the largest development project in our region in the last 5 years. The budget is $20 million, the deadline is tight, but I'm confident I can pull it off. I couldn't help but smile. If only they knew the truth. The project was literally falling apart at the seams. 2 contractors, including Meridian Construction, had already pulled out due to constant payment delays and changes in the technical specifications. What's so funny, Delancey? Fletcher asked, noticing my reaction. Nothing, I shrugged. Just remembered something. Share it with us, he insisted. We could all have a laugh. It's not worth mentioning, I replied. I'm sure Delancey just doesn't want to distract us from your story, dear, my mother interjected. Please continue. And Fletcher continued, puffing himself up with pride like a peacock. He talked about strategies and innovations, leadership and breakthroughs. Every word was a lie, but no one at the table knew that except me. And most importantly, he concluded, this project will be my springboard to the vice presidency, probably by the end of the year. Wonderful, my mother exclaimed. We always knew you would achieve great things. Unlike some, she added in a low voice, giving me a meaningful look. This time I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard. What do you mean, Mom? I asked, trying to sound calm. Nothing, dear, she smiled with feigned tenderness. Just stating a fact that you and Fletcher have different career paths. And what's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with it. She raised her hands in a defensive gesture. Just a little sad. You've always been such a capable girl. I just thought you would achieve more. What do you mean by more? I asked, feeling anger rising inside me. Well, she waved her hand vaguely. A prestigious position, a good salary, respect from your colleagues. Everything Fletcher has achieved. Maybe I have different priorities, I said. Of course, dear. She smiled condescendingly. And there's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone is born for greatness. Most people live ordinary lives, and that's normal. Exactly, Fletcher chimed in. The world needs ordinary people doing ordinary jobs while people like me make important decisions and move the economy forward. They both looked at me with such an expression of benevolent superiority that I gasped with indignation. You know what? I started, but Tegan interrupted me. Oh, Fletch is so funny, she said, playfully slapping his arm. But he has a point. Not everyone can be a big boss. Someone has to shuffle the papers. They laughed. Everyone except Grandma and Tallulah. Even my father, who was usually more reserved, smiled. By the way, Delancey, my mother continued when the laughter died down, I always thought you should have gone into a more feminine profession, maybe interior design or event planning. You've always been good at that kind of thing. I've never been interested in either, I said dryly. Because you've always been so stubborn, my mother sighed. You never listened to my advice, unlike Fletcher. Your advice has always been wise, Mom, Fletcher said obsequiously. I owe you a lot. You know, Delaney, my mother leaned across the table with such touching concern on her face that I wanted to scream. Maybe you should think about a career change before it's too late. Thanks for the advice, I tried to say calmly, even though I was boiling inside. I'll think about it. Or maybe, Fletcher interjected, you should consider working for a larger company. I could put in a good word for you at Global Investments. They're always looking for good assistants. Assistants? I asked, feeling my cheeks flush. Yes, of course, he shrugged. With your experience, it's hard to expect anything more, but it would be a good start. A start? I'm 24 and I already have a career. Oh, come on, what kind of career is that? Tegan dismissed. Manager at a small construction company. That even sounds boring. They laughed again. I sat there, clutching the edge of the table, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. Not the kind of angry that makes you scream and throw things. No, this was a cold rage, crystal clear and very, very calm. You know what's funny, Fletcher? I said quietly but clearly. The laughter gradually died down. Everyone turned to me. What, little sister? He smiled condescendingly. I opened my mouth to reply, but at that moment the waiter approached us with the bill. Everything was excellent, thank you, my father said, reaching for the bill. Oh, don't worry about it, sir, the waiter bowed slightly. The bill has already been taken care of. What? My father frowned. By whom? The waiter looked at me, and I nodded almost imperceptibly. Miss Delancey Hatch took care of all the expenses today, he said. There was a deafening silence. Everyone looked at me with surprise bordering on shock. The silence at the table was so deafening that I could hear glasses clinking somewhere in the far corner of the restaurant. 6 pairs of eyes stared at me in disbelief. What do you mean? Took care of all the expenses. My mother was the first to speak, addressing the waiter but looking at me. Miss Hatch paid for the full holiday package, including a private room, a premium menu, and champagne, the waiter replied with a polite smile. Everything was arranged earlier this week. This must be some kind of mistake, my father frowned. Delancey couldn't have— No mistake, Dad, I said calmly, taking a sip from my glass. I did organize and pay for tonight. But why? Fletcher blurted out, clearly puzzled. I had my reasons, I replied, enjoying the moment. Thank you, I said to the waiter. Everything was excellent. We're happy to serve you, Miss Hatch. The waiter bowed slightly and left. Delaney, what's going on? My mother asked demandingly as soon as the waiter was gone. Where did you get the money for all this? I took a deep breath. The moment I had been waiting for several years had finally arrived. I decided it was a good opportunity to celebrate 2 important pieces of news, I said. The first one has already been mentioned, Fletcher's supposed promotion. Supposed? What do you mean? Tegan asked, glancing quickly at her husband. Exactly what I said, turning to my brother. Fletcher, why don't you tell the family how things are going with your project and with your career in general? Fletcher paled, but quickly regained his composure. I don't know what you're talking about, sis. He tried to smile, but it came out unnaturally. My project is going exactly according to plan. Really? I raised an eyebrow. What about the fact that 2 key contractors have pulled out of the project because of constant payment delays? Or that our main client threatened to sue us for missing the deadline? Or that your boss, Harrison Pike, is already looking for your replacement? This time, Fletcher couldn't hide his reaction. His eyes widened in surprise and fear. How did you— he began, but stopped himself. One of the contractors was Meridian Construction, I explained. We withdrew from the project 3 weeks ago after not receiving payment for the second phase of the work. It cost us a lot of money, but it would have cost us even more to stay. What does that mean? My mother interrupted, looking from me to Fletcher. Fletcher, what is she saying? My brother remained silent, clenching his fists. It means, I continued, that Fletcher didn't get a raise. In fact, he's about to be fired. The project he was so excited about is practically a failure, and everyone in the San Mateo business community knows it." "That's not true," Fletcher exclaimed, finally finding his voice. "She's just jealous." "Fletcher, dear," I said gently, "let's not do this. There are a lot of witnesses in this office, and I don't want to embarrass you any further." "If it's true," my father said slowly, "why are we just finding out now?" Fletcher was silent, his face flushing red. "Because lies have always been easier than the truth," I said for him. "It's easier to pretend to be successful than to admit defeat, especially when everyone around you is so eager to believe in your success." There was a heavy pause. I saw the emotions change on my mother's face: disbelief, confusion, anger rising. "Let's say it's true," she finally said, pursing her lips. "But that doesn't explain how you were able to pay for dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. That's hardly possible on your project manager's salary." "And that brings us to the second piece of news," I smiled. "Today, at exactly 5 p.m., I became the majority shareholder of Meridian Stroy." Now the whole family was looking at me with complete disbelief. Tallulah gasped quietly next to me. Is this a joke?" my father asked. "Not at all," I said, taking an envelope out of my purse and pulling out a document. "Here's the official notification from our CFO. I own 53% of the company's shares." I handed the document to my father, who put on his glasses and looked at it carefully. His eyebrows rose higher and higher as he read. "My God," he muttered, "this is really true, but how?" "4 years of patience, saving, and well-calculated investments," I replied. "I started buying shares when they were worth pennies. The company wasn't doing very well at the time, but I saw the potential. And, as it turns out, I was right." "You never told us," my mother said, taking the document from my father and studying it herself. "You never asked," I replied calmly. "You were too busy admiring Fletcher's achievements to be interested in my life." "That's not fair, Delancey," my mother began, but stopped, apparently remembering the whole evening. We always cared about you. You always made sure I didn't stand out," I corrected. "That I stayed in the shadows and didn't overshadow Fletcher. But you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore." "And how much is the company worth?" Fletcher asked suddenly, showing interest in my words for the first time. "Last year's turnover was $4 million. This year it's projected to be around 6, I replied. "And with the new contracts we've just signed, it could reach 10 next year." Fletcher's jaw literally dropped. "But it's a construction company," he stammered. "They build buildings, nothing special." "Nothing special brings in $6 million a year," I remarked. "And unlike some people, we honor our commitments and pay our contractors on time." "Now it's your turn to blush, Fletcher," my grandmother said quietly, and for the first time I saw a spark of amusement in her eyes. My mother still couldn't seem to comprehend what was happening. "But why didn't you say anything?" she repeated. "All these years when we thought you were just—" She stopped, realizing she was about to say something even more humiliating. "Just what, Mom?" I wasn't going to make it easy for her. "Just a failure? Just mediocre? Just someone who could never measure up to the brilliant Fletcher?" "I never said that." "Yes, you did," I interrupted. "You all did. Maybe not in those words, but that's what you meant. Tonight is a perfect example." "We just wanted you to strive for more," my mother protested weakly. "No," I shook my head. "You wanted me to accept my place in the shadows, so I wouldn't threaten Fletcher's status as the only star in the family." "That's ridiculous," my mother snorted. "We've always supported you." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "Who refused to pay for my college, saying that 4 years at university is a waste of money for a girl? Who constantly criticized my career choice, calling it modest but stable? Who spent the entire evening belittling me by comparing me to my brother?" My mother opened her mouth but couldn't find a response. "I never sought to compete with Fletcher," I continued in a softer tone. "I didn't need to be better than him. I just wanted to be appreciated for who I am, not constantly compared to him." "We appreciated you," my father said quietly. "No, Dad," I shook my head. "You tolerated me. There's a difference." I turned to my brother. "And I'm not gloating, Fletcher. I'm genuinely sorry your project failed. I know what it's like when everything falls apart. But unlike you, I've learned to deal with failure on my own, without blaming others or burying my head in the sand. Fletcher sat with his eyes down, his face a mixture of shame and disbelief. Tegan looked completely lost next to him. "What now?" my mother asked quietly. "Did you buy this dinner to humiliate us? To get revenge for all these years?" "No, Mom," I sighed. "I bought this dinner to celebrate. At first I just planned to tell you about the deal. But after everything I heard today, I realized you needed a lesson. You can't judge people by their apparent status or by what other people say about them. Sometimes there's something significant hidden behind a modest facade." An awkward silence hung over the table again. I saw my parents exchange confused glances, Fletcher drumming his fingers nervously on the table, and Tegan trying to keep a straight face, though she was clearly close to tears. "So, are you going to kick us out of your life?" my mother asked suddenly, and for the first time ever, I heard real fear in her voice. "No," I shook my head. "You're my family, with all your flaws. But I won't let you treat me like a second-class citizen anymore." Today, everything has changed. "Yeah, right," Fletcher grumbled. "It's hard to look down on someone with a $6 million annual turnover." "It's not about the money, Fletcher," I looked him straight in the eye. "It's about respect. In recognizing that a person's value isn't determined by their salary or job title. I hope today's events will help you understand that, especially now that you're facing a professional crisis yourself." "Delancey is right," my grandmother said unexpectedly. "We've long forgotten what it means to be a real family. We've become spectators at Fletcher's endless show, and Delancey was always behind the scenes, invisible but essential." "Thank you, Grandma." I squeezed her hand. "I always knew you were special." She winked at me. "I was just waiting for everyone else to notice." "Well," my father said, clearing his throat, "I guess we all have some thinking to do. And Delancey, I need to apologize. We all do." "Yes," my mother agreed reluctantly. "Perhaps we were too focused on Fletcher." "Perhaps?" I couldn't suppress a chuckle. "All right," she sighed. "We were unfair to you, and I'm sorry. Really sorry." I looked at her closely, trying to see if she was sincere. In her eyes, I saw a mixture of shame, remorse, and, surprisingly, respect. "I accept your apology, Mom," I said finally. "And I hope tonight will be the beginning of a new relationship, one that is more honest and equal." "Of course, dear." She tried to smile, though it came out a little forced. "We all want that." I glanced at my watch. It was almost 11, and I felt emotionally drained. "I think that's enough revelations for one night," I said, standing up. "Thanks to everyone for coming." "Are you leaving already?" my father asked. "Yes," I nodded. "I've had a long day and I have a lot of work to do tomorrow. I am the owner of a company, after all." I couldn't resist that little dig, and judging by the way Fletcher grimaced, it had hit its mark. "I think I'll go too," Tallulah said suddenly, standing up next to me. "Delancey, want to split a cab?" "Sure." I smiled at her. We said goodbye to the family, reservedly, but without any obvious hostility, and left the office. We walked through the main dining room in silence, but as soon as we were outside, Tallulah grabbed my hands and spun me around. "You're incredible!" she exclaimed. "I can't believe you've been hiding such a bombshell all this time. You own a company?" "Seriously?" I laughed, feeling truly lighthearted for the first time that evening. "Let's go to the terrace," I suggested, nodding toward the restaurant's outdoor seating area overlooking the bay. "Cocktails are on me." "You're sure, Miss Millionaire?" Tallulah playfully nudged me in the shoulder. We took a table in the corner of the terrace, away from the other guests. The night was warm, with a light breeze from the bay. The city lights reflected in the dark water, creating the illusion of a starry sky beneath us. "So," Tallulah said when our cocktails were brought, "tell me everything, from the very beginning." And I told her about how I started buying shares almost by accident when the company was going through a rough patch, about how I gradually realized the business's potential and developed a plan to acquire it, about the sleepless nights spent balancing the books and calculating the risks, about the small victories and inevitable setbacks along the way. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Tallulah asked when I finished. "Not even me?" "I was afraid of jinxing it," I admitted. And to be honest, part of me enjoyed the secret. The thought that I was achieving something significant while everyone thought I was a failure gave me strength. "How does it feel now that the truth is out?" I wondered, looking at the lights of the bay. "Liberating," I finally replied. "Like I can finally be myself without hiding behind a mask of mediocrity." "You were never mediocre," Tallulah said seriously, "even if your family didn't see it." "Thank you," I squeezed her hand. "You always believed in me." "Because I always saw the real you," she smiled. "The stubborn, smart, determined Delancey who doesn't give up, even when everything is against her." We were silent, sipping our cocktails and enjoying the moment. "What do you think will happen next?" Tallulah asked after a while. "With your family, I mean?" "I don't know," I shrugged. "Maybe nothing will change. Maybe everything will change. Either way, I'm not going to live up to their expectations or try to meet their standards anymore." "What about Fletcher? Are you going to help him with his problems at work?" I thought about it. "Maybe," I finally said, "but not right now. He needs time to realize his mistakes and learn to take responsibility for them. If he really changes and asks for help, I'll think about it." "Fair enough." Tallulah nodded. "You know," I said after a pause, "I used to think that real success was when others recognized you, when your parents were proud of you, when your colleagues respected you, when everyone around you admired your achievements. And now? Now I realize that real success is when you recognize your own worth. When you don't need constant approval from others, because you know your own worth. I achieved what I wanted, not for the recognition of my family, but for myself. And that makes the victory even sweeter." Tallulah raised her glass. "To real success, and to you, Delancey Hatch, the most amazing cousin in the world."